first day of the Galle Literary Festival. We're delighted to be joined today by Balli Kaur Jaswal, Amanthi Harris, and McCall Smith. Balli has been commended for her writing on the Punjabi diaspora in Singapore, and she has also taught creative writing at universities. Amanthi is a writer of novels and short stories. Her short stories have appeared both in print and on radio. Alexander is a prolific writer with over 100 titles to his name and has been credited with bringing lots of laughter to his readers. And welcome back to Dialog, Alexander. Our moderator for today is a writer, editor, teacher, and book critic, Artika Bakshi. I'll hand it over to you now.
Hello everyone. Welcome to our little community while we talk about community in stories and storytelling. The authors on the panel don't really need an introduction, but I can only tell you that each of their stories, each of their novels makes you laugh, makes you cry, and sometimes makes you introspect as well as to your role in your community where you live and how as a person you interact with the people in your day-to-day lives. So we're going to start with a little passage reading just to immerse you into the stories that we're going to talk about. We are going to start with Amanthi because Amanthi has written a beautiful book, beautiful place, and it has something to do with Sri Lanka. So over to Amanthi.
Is that working? Okay, great. Hi everyone, so this is a beautiful place, and I'm going to read a passage about a character called Ria, who is a guest at the villa guest house, that is the main location here. And then it was all over. Ria sat in the taxi, being driven away, while they stood in the lane waving goodbye. Soon they would go back inside and be together. She took off her sunglasses and wiped her eyes. The taxi driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror and politely looked away. What might she have become if she had stayed? If she had run back crying to her grandparents, pleading not to be sent away? In their bungalow at the edge of the city, in a garden full of fruit trees and flowers and an orchid house, how might she have grown? Wrapped in their love and concern, cushioned in the soft bed of their acceptance, who might she have been? She had felt their world so close sometimes at the villa, in the smell of the sea in the mornings, the noise of traffic and crows. She had loved to hear the muezzin's calls at the mosque over the road in Colombo, and the priest chanting in the temple next door, to feel the silky saris of grandma's friends seated close at bhajans, singing to the drone of a harmonium. She thought of fresh flower garlands hanging in the flower stall outside the Coville, bright paper lanterns in the gardens at Vesak, the green parrots in the mango trees, and lurid pink candy floss at the Vale Festival. How lulled she had been, hearing the voices of women in gardens behind the villa, talking in what seemed a foreign tongue, until she realized that she had understood every word. For those words lived in her still. All this she loved. It was what beautiful meant to her, what it would always mean. Gerhardt had raised a whole world from a shack on a dubious road with questionable neighbours, a valiant attempt, a triumph even, for it was the effort that counted after all, to have dared to try. Nothing was ever truly lost. Old worlds could be remade. Even the people that would never come back could be found in new others. At the villa, an old lost life had flickered alive, and now she felt its small bright flame inside her. The taxi paused as they reached the main road, and with an excited jolt joined the cars and trucks and buses full of people going on to somewhere else.
Sri Lanka, most of us live here. I've lived here long enough, and having listened to that passage and having read that passage when I was reading the book, it was the Sri Lanka we all know. Thank you so much. Over to Balli, who's going to read from her new book, which is Now You See Us. Is this in here? If you haven't read the book, she'll just give you a little description about what this book is about.
So this is a novel about 3 Filipino domestic workers in Singapore who band together to prove the innocence of a friend of theirs who's been accused of murder. This is quite early on in the novel when it's a scene where one of the domestic workers named Angel she has her day off. So it's just a moment where Singapore sort of transforms, which happens on Sundays when domestic workers get to go out and the workforce tends to stay at home. On weekday mornings, the mass rapid transit car is a silent sea of pressed shirts tucked into the sharp edges of waistbands and the soapy fragrance of the freshly showered workforce. The office workers and school children peer into phone screens or listen to earphones while staring into any slivers of white space in the crowd. Sundays are different. Angel boards the train at Chua Chu Kang station and feels it pick up momentum as it slices through the sun-bleached suburbs. Clouds of greenery billow beneath her feet, and she's brought to eye level with the silvery edges of the apartment buildings that loom over her throughout the week. On Sundays, Angel owns the city, and she's not the only person who feels this way. A glance at the trimmed parks below shows women spreading out picnic mats, waiting the corners with tall steel pots and boomboxes. Dressed in their best clothes, they croon their favorite songs from home and serve buffets of home-cooked food, relishing the freedom of being outdoors. Angel knows she looks her best too. Her chin-length hair is brushed smooth of bobby-pin dents, and her small lips break into an easy smile. Watching her reflection in the train window, she turns her head from side to side to let her silver earring cuffs catch the light. 2 Burmese girls get on at Bishan station. Their cheeks are streaked with tree bark paste to protect their skin from the sun, and they hold on to each other as the train judders and picks up speed again. Construction workers arrive at the next stop in checked shirts tucked into trousers, clutching their mobile phones. The carriage seems to rock to the chorus of this crowd, and Angel feels that she's part of every conversation, even the ones in Bengali and Burmese. The suburbs peel away, and the train plunges her into the night of the underground.
Next on my agenda is to go to Singapore on a Sunday and try and get onto the public transport and walk on Orchard Street and go to the parks. Yes, I could imagine what the scene was like. And now we have Sir Alexander McCall Smith, who I'm going to call Sandy, and he's going to read to us from his latest poetry book, I Think of You. It's his 2nd book, and he is down to 110 books. That's what he just told me, and congratulations on that. And over to you.
Thank you very much. This is a brief poem. This is my 2nd collection of poetry. I'm a great fan of the poet W.H. Auden, who I think wrote the most beautiful, humane poetry. And he wrote a very famous poem called September the 1st, 1939, which he was in New York on that date, and he was sitting in a bar, and the first line is, "I sit in one of the low dives," and he describes the challenges that Europe faced, and indeed the world faced, at that crucial time in history, in that particular point with the invasion of Poland. And I've written a poem called September the 1st, 2022, which in a sense is homage to Auden's poem. Auden's poem, September the 1st, 1939, gave great comfort to people in the United States after the Twin Towers attacks, 9/11. And people seized upon that poem and faxed it. Faxes still existed in those days. And they faxed it to one another for comfort. But he was talking about how, I suppose it was a sense of great threat which was being faced by various communities. And I feel that our own times are a time of crisis. We look around the book today and we see really very frightening things happening in so many different parts of the world. It's a time of great international irritability. And so September the 1st, 2022 is really in homage to that. This particular morning dawns like any other in early autumn, unremarkable apart from the date to which an event a long time ago gave a special significance, a haunting of a sort our rueful calendars have become quite accustomed to. Where are we now? The question frightened children always ask when, lost in a wood, they fail to see a way out. The trees press in, the trunk of each bears a label with a specified warning, and the inventory is a long one. A war has already begun on fields that once grew an abundance of wheat, and now grow mines, and the craters that mines produce. How many lives have ended in sudden detonation? The newspapers have the answers. We know so much now. All human knowledge, we're told, can be found on a single chip. Yet nowhere is there an answer, or at least nowhere is there an answer that we'd really care to pay attention to. If there were a bar into which the thirsty might quietly slip, the talk inside would probably be of things quite unconnected with our own and immediate crisis, or the needs of a suffering world, and understandably so. Few frequent bars to address their doubts. But still there are those who valiantly continue to affirm they are recognizable, marked by a feeling for the future that the rest of us seem to have lost. We turn to them for a prescription now that the other pharmacies are closed. We wait for their message about honesty, its importance, and the seriousness of purpose we momentarily lost. We hear them say that we must clear the stage of the actors whose grease paint concealed something we knew was wrong for us, for our fragile world. We learn at last the lesson we teach as a didactic nursery rhyme to small and selfish children. Those who have a lot of stuff should share with those without enough.
Thank you so much, and it is very apt today with what's going on around us, and we all see that. So if I can start with you. We're talking about communities in stories. As storytellers, we are, to some extent, I think, anthropologists, ethnographers. We keep records and we write about communities. How effective is it today? I mean, there's so many books you are writing, your poem is beautiful. How effective is it? Are we learning our lessons?
Well, I suppose that if we look at human history, we would conclude that humanity really consistently fails to learn the lessons that it needs to learn. It's a depressing conclusion. However, I think that the role of storytelling, of fiction, and indeed there's a very important role for children's literature in that respect, because children's literature is the way in which we develop moral imagination in children. I think that fiction provides a very, very strong sense of community, because we are a storytelling species. If you look back to the earliest examples of human art, in other words, the paintings that we find in the early caves of Homo sapiens, and indeed even of Neanderthal caves, we find signs that there was art. Those drawings, the drawings of the hunt on the wall of the cave, are actually telling a story. They're narrating to people who form a community, and so stories bind us together. It's our way of establishing human community. I think the storytelling impulse is at the heart of that, and it continues to be at the heart of our experience of human community.
Thank you. Yes, and you also write the #1 ladies detective agency. You've got 44 Scotland Street, and the Isabel Dalhousie series, which are light readings but with a lot of message inside. I would like to ask Amanthi and Balli, in that order, or if anyone would like to take it, as diasporic writers, you are writing from outside. You have not really lived in the communities that you're writing about. How does that affect your storytelling?
Well, I can take this one. Okay. To some extent, in my case, writing is a way of recreating the community that I left, and also fantasize about rejoining. So, for instance, in my book, I created a world of very kind of familiar to me in a way, because it was reflecting the world of my grandparents, which is very accepting and tolerant and very open and creative and very inspiring to grow up in. So I created this for a host of characters that were all looking for something, who'd come on holiday to Sri Lanka to find themselves or find some connection to the place, as in the extract I read. So for me, I think writing about creating a community was a way of exploring all these different ways of connection. Because as you said, the idea of storytelling, this idea of, it's so fundamental. And I used to run a storytelling project for families, and I used to see how the minute I was telling a story, people would sort of glaze over, and the connection was with themselves, essentially. But we managed to create a community of parents and children that would come every week. And so it's a funny kind of almost dichotomous process where you go inwards, connect with yourself, but you also connect with others. So it's a very strange chemistry, stories and people and our awareness of certain sort of universal ideas that come through. So that's what I find most inspiring about stories and writing, that there is a possibility of connection.
The question was, you both are diasporic writers, and how do you connect with the community that you write about? Do you do justice? I mean, it's a larger question. Do you do justice to the community that you're writing about?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that when you were asking that question, there was a comment about us not writing about the communities that we belong to. But I would argue that if you're writing about diaspora, then you actually are, like I write about the Punjabi Sikh diaspora, and like in one of my novels, The Unlikely Adventures of the Shergill Sisters, they go to India, and that's a place that I can't really write about authentically as a person who grew up in India. I couldn't write about that place from the point of view of someone who grew up there. I could write about it from the point of view of a diaspora person returning there, which is a very different experience. So I think when I sort of write about community and diaspora, I think about that sense of outsideness, right? And that sense of, that real kind of conflicting sense of loyalties of, I'm from here, but I'm actually not from here. And there are times when I feel like I fit in and I belong, but then people look at me and they say, you're an outsider. And I find that to be, it's its own country, it's its own place, with its own rules, with its own conventions, and its own struggles. I find that sort of in-betweenness really fascinating, and I think there's a lot to explore in that.
Yes, because that's something I experience as well, and I can understand. And the thing is, has there ever been any backlash writing about Botswana or about Sri Lanka not being there, and about Punjab? So we'll start in that order.
I think that's a very interesting point that you raise there, Artie, that I think that there are those who say that the only people who can write about a place are the people who have lived there all their lives. I don't think really that's particular. I can see the argument, but I think that it's very important that writers should still be allowed to look at the world in its entirety and write about anywhere that they wish to. They've got to be careful that they mustn't misrepresent what they're doing. But I think that if they're open about it, it's often the external eye that picks up things that other people may not particularly pick up if you live in a place. And so I think this perspective that you've talked about, the outside perspective, is a very valuable one. And if you say to writers, oh, you can only write about wherever if you are a member of that particular community, I think that is reducing the range and potential of literature in a remarkable. I mean, Shakespeare, Hamlet's set in Denmark. Shakespeare never went anywhere, really, and yet he wrote.
Sorry, were there enough critiques that time? We have social media. Everyone will post about us. So, please continue.
I think it's very interesting. That raises really interesting questions about how we could extrapolate our contemporary technology to earlier writers. Walter Scott produced a tremendous number of historical novels. He invented the historical novel, and he did that without a word processor. And so you can imagine if Walter Scott had Microsoft Word, his output would have been amazing. And similarly, you can talk about what antibiotics would have done to opera, because if they had antibiotics, the scenes where Mimi dies in Marbella wouldn't occur, because they'd say, have some penicillin, Mimi, and you'll get better. That's we're going on. Sorry.
That's perfectly fine, because you also don't have, I mean, our ideas are similar, but now you have apps that talk about plagiarism. I mean, it's my idea. If somebody else has thought of it, fine, but we didn't have that. So I'm going to go back to Amanthi with this.
Sorry, what was
he was talking about how, as outsiders, we can write about things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love the idea of being able to roam freely, and I think there's a certain sort of truth in a voice that comes through, an emotional truth, perhaps, or a kind of integrity to the writing, so that the readers will accept. And I think that, and obviously, not misrepresenting the culture is key. And but if you're writing about it with any kind of conviction, that you have a connection with the material, the story that you're telling, and I think that validates the work.
Would you like to add something more to that about the modern? Yes. After. Yeah.
No, I mean, I agree.
The dilemmas we face today as to what other writers felt.
I don't know if it's something that we're necessarily just facing it today. I think the criticisms have always been there, like the things about cultural appropriation. Like, I remember those things coming up when I was in university, pre-social media. But of course, they weren't coined with such definitive language. It was more like just like a bit of, should you be writing from the point of view of an African American person? There was that kind of thing, and people, sometimes getting offended or sometimes arguing. And now, of course, we've taken some very hard stance, or some people have taken some very hard stance on that, and there are, arguments about that. I do think that the arguments have started to fizzle out a little bit. I think that they peaked with that horrible controversy with American Dirt in 2020, when everyone was at home and on social media. I feared a bit of that with this novel in particular, because my previous novels have been about, the Punjabi community, which, I clearly represent. If you look at my name and you connect me to that. But this was about Filipino domestic workers in Singapore. I lived in the Philippines for a few years, and this story is quite close to my heart. I put an author's note in the end, explaining sort of what my connection was to it. In part to sort of answer those questions, if anyone was going, who is she to write this? And of course there were people on social media who asked that. But also there were plenty of people from the Philippines, and I thought this was important, who said, this is a very authentically written book. This is a book where no stone has been left unturned. And I cannot believe this author is not Filipino, which to me was the highest praise. And there were layers and layers of work that went into that. It was me going into it first with knowing what my perceptions were and asking myself, is that condescending though? Is that perpetuating a stereotype? Like, what are the existing ideas that people already have about this group of people, and what are you doing to subvert that in some way? And then getting sensitivity readers as well, getting people of all ages and all sort of backgrounds to look at it and paying them, obviously, and doing all of that and doing justice to the story. So I felt very confident putting this out into the world.
Yes, I've read it. You gave them a voice. The ones who've read The Help have read one perspective, but with this, I don't think anyone had ever given a voice to the Filipino migrant workers in Singapore. I'm going back to you because you want to add.
I think that's marvellous that you've done that. And the key is sympathy. I think that as writers, we are meant to empathise with people. And I think as long as one is sympathetic, as long as one is self-conscious in that respect, I think it's perfectly all right. But one has to be aware of some of the peripheral dangers of that. But one thing which, flowing from this discussion, which I'd be very interested in hearing what you feel about it, is the question of men writing about women and women writing about men. I write, a lot of my characters are female. My Botswana series of novels are about a lady in Botswana and her friends, and my Isabel Dalhousie novels in Edinburgh, set in Edinburgh, about a woman. And indeed, often when I go to various events, people express surprise that I'm not a woman. and it's sometimes when I'm on tour in America, I wear my kilt. And I'm asked that question, and I say, well, you will observe I'm wearing a skirt. But that's a very interesting thing, and I think that it involves a similar appropriation of voice issue. Now, I think that really, again, as authors, we have, if we're a man or a woman, we have to imagine what it is like to be the other person, who may have a totally different personal and historical experience from oneself. So I like writing, I like the conversation of women, because women talk about more interesting things than men talk about. If you listen to men, if you go to the average bar and you listen to what men are talking about, it's really boring. And whereas if you listen to what women are talking about, it's really terrific, but it's very difficult for a male author to get that sense. Because as you approach them and you start listening to their conversation, they stop talking. And
so that's one thing, when I got the information about this panel, and I was like, okay, it's women, and it's you, because you write about women and you give women a voice. So that's really nice to have you here with us and talk about a little bit about the difference between Mama Ramotswe and Isabel Dalhousie, because she's in Botswana. You have not lived in Botswana.
Yes, I have.
You have a short bit. You were there as a young child.
I've lived.
Sorry.
I worked in
Okay.
university.
And you're writing about a Scottish woman.
Yes.
Could we talk about how different they are? Because both of them are entrenched in their communities. They are deeply into it. They are nosy sometimes. So if you could talk a little bit about them.
Yes, Mara Ramotswe is a wonderfully intelligent, intuitive lady. She's got marvellous sympathetic, intuitive ability. And she has a practical philosophy of life. Her philosophical guide is what she calls the Old Botswana Morality, which they actually have a name for, and the government supports and encourages people to read about it and to practice it. Isabel Dalhousie is a professional philosopher. I wrote about her because I'm very interested in philosophy and particularly applied ethics, and she edits a journal of applied ethics. So she approaches matters in a much more formal way and gets them wrong, whereas Mara Ramotswe, who's guided by intuition, obviously gets them right. So there are two different sorts of ladies. With Mara Ramotswe, I wanted to portray the sort of woman that I met, many examples of that in Botswana, of tremendously competent, hard-working ladies who really are was so important in the society, really keep the whole show on the road in many respects. So I wanted to portray that very, very positive characteristic. Isabel a bit different, but both of them are from the female perspective. So I use a woman's voice, and I think men should be able to get, male authors should be able to put themselves into women's shoes. In fact, some male authors probably rather enjoy doing that sort of thing. But that's another matter. We won't go there.
I think, to have a community going, we do need some nosy women who think it's their agenda or goal to solve everyone's problems.
Well, gossip. Gossip is very... I love writing about Nora Matsui gossiping, because gossip forms a very, very important part of community. Talking around the local water pump is what creates the building blocks.
And gossip is kind of the way writers, I think as a writer, that kind of desire for gossip is also the pull into a character, right? So it's a way of going inside people and finding out what's going on with them and how they might behave and think, and just kind of escaping your sort of own view and taking on. I loved kind of writing about bad men and kind men. And
you did have a lot of Colombo gossip in your book.
Yeah.
And with Balli, she had the Gurdwara, the Sikh temple gossip, where women started writing stories and erotic stories. So please continue, and then we come to Balli for this, for gossip. So we have a license to gossip today.
I mean, it's in the sense that when you're the author and you have this screen, and you can project your little puppet figures and make them as detailed as you want to, and also at the same time, the writing process creates a little community for you as a writer, right? So you kind of embody this sort of you inhabit this world and that you make, and you created a world for yourself too, and that's what I write, really, that whole excitement of entering other rooms, other minds, and inventing it, because of course you can play God whilst you're writing.
Other people's lives as well.
Absolutely.
Well, there's an element of gossip that is, and I think its major function is survival, right? Like, we think it's sort of frivolous and it's trivial, but as you were saying, Sandy, like, storytelling is for survival. Those caveman drawings are actually gossip in a way, right? They are, warnings and look up here and you wouldn't believe what I saw out there. It's very much what we do now. When I was writing this book, now you see us, and I was talking to a Filipino friend and telling him that I was thinking about writing this book, the first thing he said was look into the role of gossip. Because domestic workers, there's so many unwritten rules about how they should behave at home, and so many things that are not clear to them in the bureaucracy of working as domestic workers in Singapore. There's so many things that work against them. That the way that they sort of create these firmer networks and this firmer sense of support and stability is by gossip, is by sharing information with each other. And so that was actually one of the elements that I included very strongly in this book, is the WhatsApp groups and the Facebook groups and all of that, and the ways in which people share information and go watch out for this employer, or they're talking about us, and things like that. And those things kind of go a little bit out of control of the gossip networks when there are times of crisis. But they're also very helpful, right? They're helpful in kind of spotting danger. In my other novel, Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows, if you're going to be writing about the Punjabi diaspora community and a group of elderly women in a temple in London, it's going to be about gossip. The novel is going to be very gossipy, and it is it's not gossip that brings them together. It's actually something deeper. It's a sense of solidarity. It's a sense of doing away with taboos and talking about things that they haven't been able to talk about before. But gossip is the thing that actually gets them into trouble, because then people start spreading these stories and saying there's this group of naughty widows in London who have started this erotic storytelling club.
With creative writing. So that's where all the gossip comes there. Now, coming to another point, Amanthi talks about Sri Lanka, Jared's writing. You've given, little chapters on what he thinks of Sri Lanka. Our writing also gives us that little freedom to say things which we cannot openly say today, especially, with censorship and everyone coming up in arms. We can start with you. How do you think, you've written 110 books and you're writing more. How has it changed with censorship and what you're supposed to write and what you're not supposed to write? And then we'll come to Amanthi and Balli.
Yes, that's a very, very important point. I think it's absolutely vital that authors should maintain their right to write authentically and to write without censorship. There are all sorts of people of every variety who would close us down and who would try to stop us writing, and I think authors really have to defend freedom of speech. There are grave threats to freedom of speech in the current climate. Freedom of speech can very, very quickly be eroded anywhere in the world, and I think we just really have to defend it. Now, having said that, I do understand that there are writers who may live in societies where circumspection is forced upon them for realistic reasons, and there they may have to be elusive, and they may have to resort to metaphor and to parable and so on to get their message across. Final point, I would say that I've encountered some, I suppose I have some form of self-censorship because I'm aware of the fact that you don't really want to poke your readership with too much of a stick. So I tend to avoid religious issues. I once dealt with a religious issue concern. I mentioned a particular branch of the Church of Scotland, which takes a very strict view, and I wrote about somebody's feelings about that, and it caused great distress to this particular bit of the church. So I think that we're all aware of that, and I think that we also don't want needlessly to upset people or cause them distress. So I think that there's certain subjects that you may have private views on that you wouldn't raise out of courtesy, and you don't want to make people unhappy unnecessarily. And I think we all probably do that. We know that there are certain areas that we don't go into.
So then we need to make sure we are storytellers and we are not always the activists trying to create awareness. Yes, Amanthi, over to you.
That's very true. I mean, if there is anything that I felt I really wanted to do when I was writing Beautiful Place was to kind of convey this sort of, find a way of conveying my sort of love for Sri Lanka and that's my kind of total idealistic kind of, and I found the way through the guidebook that's the kind of written by an outsider, Jared, who is a sort of flamboyant, loving, slightly eccentric character, and that he gave me permission in a way to express I suppose my childhood kind of nostalgic sort of passion for the life that I had here, and I really wanted to find a legitimate way to, and if I had a mission, that was the one mission I had, and that could, but it had to go via character, and it had to make sense, and it had to be true to that character.
But there were people who were objecting to his book in the story, and he had to pay the price for it.
Exactly, yes. So I didn't want it to be too idealistic, and I wanted to also show that like his idealism was misplaced, and so that you have to live in the real world, and you have to. He was somebody who didn't fully respect the world that he was actually in, and I wanted that to come in too. So I allowed him his freedom for a little while, and then I raided him. As I say, play God.
Balli, censorship, control.
Well, I live in one of those societies where, authors have to be a bit circumspect. I live in Singapore, where there's an interesting sort of insidious form of censorship that has taken place. Where, like, when I was growing up, it was quite obvious. It was very blatant. You cannot say this, and you can say this. And then as we've become more sophisticated, as social media has come into things, the Singapore government doesn't want to appear to outsiders to not be permissive, right? They want to appear to outsiders to be permissive and to not be censored. Well, no, not us. We're the cool parents, right? We allow anything while still censoring. And so it has taken another form now, which I noticed, especially when writing this book, but also with other things, where you're just not told, but suddenly things become less available to you. So suddenly you're told that your contract with the university that you work for might not be renewed because someone in the Ministry of Education is holding it up for administrative reasons. But everyone knows it's because of something you've written. This has happened to me. Or the funding that you applied for from National Arts Council to do research for this particular novel has suddenly just, you're not getting, it's just not going into your bank account and you're not sure why. And you've emailed the people in charge, and they've just kind of gone, they've knocked you back for a very long time, and then they say, well, let's meet for coffee, which I've made it very clear I'll never do, because I won't have a record of what they're saying. So I've always said, no, I want an email explaining to me why I'm not getting my funding. And then they send this amazing, beautiful, long-winded email saying, well, it's because of this and this and this. But no, we're not censoring you. We would never ask you to change your novel. It's all these other things that are happening. And then there's a line buried in there about, page 48, there's a moment. Oh, we would never say that there's anything wrong with it, but you want to think about it. We would never say it though. And there's a veiled, it's sort of funny, but there's also a veiled threat there, because what they're saying is, it's a threat to say, if we withdraw the funding and if you make noise about it, we will, this is the line that we'll take, is that you were sort of aligning yourself with something that the public generally will be angry about. This is going to be quite difficult for you. So there's a lot there. It's quite sinister. And what happens is that self-censorship that you spoke about, where as a writer, if you're conditioned with that, is the government going to be okay with this, or am I going to lose my job over this, you start to write scenes that go, maybe not. And to some degree, sometimes that is about courtesy, sometimes it is about, there's certain things that you don't broach, and why would you poke those sort of things. But then there's some other things where you're like, actually I'd like to say this, and I think it's an important conversation, but I have trouble enrolling my kid in school or something like that. There's these sorts of scary sort of mechanisms in the background, and it's become very, very insidious and very, very subtle and quiet, but it still exists. Yeah.
I agree with all of that. I think one alarming thing is the application of the offence principle, that students, for example, are saying that they have a right not to be offended or not to be distressed by what they read. So that has led to university departments of literature saying, giving warnings, if you read Shakespeare, we must warn you that some of it's very distressing. Jane Austen, you get a warning about Jane Austen. Some of the characters don't get the man they want. You may be really upset about that. We don't want to upset you. The reading is getting bad in some universities where they won't teach books where there are scenes which might give people nightmares. So Dickens, you can read Dickens, and it's very distressing. So I think that's really dangerous, and it's a great pity. But it's actually causing universities to not to teach certain books and to have sensitivity or offence warnings right at the very beginning of the course, saying you may be upset by what you're reading. And
well, it's a snake eating its own head kind of thing, where like it's quite a right-wing thing for governments to say we're censoring this and you can't talk about this and all of that. But their reasons are very much, you're not allowed to say anything about progressive values, right? Anything, you can't speak on behalf of domestic workers. How dare you? Because they need to be shown their place, and we need hierarchy and all that. But then on the other side, on the left side, there's this very, very there's this idea of trigger warnings and, you know, the sensitivity, and they both come around to the same thing, which is censorship. It's a snake eating its own head, which is what's interesting. I think if you're extreme on both sides of it, you end up kind of meeting, you know, maybe for different reasons, but you're still doing the same thing.
So, I mean, do we come back to oral storytelling then? I mean, for communities, what are we doing then?
Well, I mean, oral storytelling is very important, and people are still practicing it. In Scotland, we encourage that. We have storytellers. Most communities have arrangements, and their arts bodies will encourage. We're losing the oral storytellers. Usually, it was the grandmothers who told the stories. Grandmothers are too busy. They're off on gap years.
And they're writing erotic stories in temples.
And grandmothers are writing erotic stories, you see, that's
It's a different type of storytelling. You know, the oral storytelling, like I was saying, is a community kind of creating activity, and the written word is a different beast in a way. It's your personal engagement, and so that's so important. You know, it's what people learn, what's going on. I mean, you can never really be in anyone else's head until you're reading, and then you know someone's thoughts. You're privy to so much, and that's so important. And so reading is a different activity and an equally necessary one, I think.
As long as it doesn't get censored all the time. And we did have oral traditions all over the world which survived centuries. And those are the stories that have been written down recently.
The other thing which I'd be very interested to hear what others feel about this, but there's another form of community